In the far reaches of the galaxy, where hundreds of species gathered to train for the defense of the known worlds, there was one belief that never changed among the alien races. Everyone thought that humans were fragile. They were seen as short-lived. Creatures with soft skin, small bones, and weak frames, barely able to survive without technology. For many, humans were considered useful for strategy, for science, for their strange imagination, but never for direct combat. That was why the alien girl Lyra almost laughed when she was told that her new training partner in the Galactic Legion would be a human soldier named Ethan. She came from a warrior race that prized strength above everything, a race with thick bones and hardened muscles built from birth to fight. To her people, battle was life, and weakness was shame. When she first saw Ethan, her confidence grew even stronger. He looked calm, almost too calm, standing there in the training hall with his arms folded. His frame was not bulky like the warriors she knew. His skin lacked the hardened plates of her kind, and his smile seemed almost careless. She thought to herself that this would be easy. Humans were not made for war. They were soft creatures, of flesh, not of steel. She would prove it quickly. The training hall was large, with walls of alloy that echoed the sounds of soldiers sparring. Groups of cadets clashed in drills while commanders watched with sharp eyes. When the instructor called for pairs, Lyra stepped forward with pride and locked her gaze on Ethan. He nodded politely as if it made no difference to him. She felt insulted. Did he not realize how lucky he was to even face her in combat? Her people had won wars long before humans left their own planet. She stretched her arms and prepared her stance, confident that this match would end in seconds. The whistle blew, and she charged at him with full speed. Her steps thundered against the floor as she raised her arm to strike his chest. She aimed to knock him down quickly, to hear the gasp of air escape his lungs. But the moment her forearm slammed into his torso, a shock ran through her body. Pain exploded in her wrist. She staggered back, eyes wide, clutching her arm in disbelief. His body had not moved, not even an inch. Ethan stood like a pillar, calm, unshaken, while she tried to hide the tremble in her hands. The laughter that had begun in her mind vanished instantly. The other cadets noticed the clash. Whispers rose around the hall. Some leaned forward, their eyes fixed on Lyra as she flexed her injured arm, her pride burning hotter than the pain. She could not accept it. She convinced herself it was a mistake, a wrong angle, nothing more. She rushed at him again, this time, aiming a kick. Ethan stepped aside smoothly, almost lazily, and with a gentle push of his palm, he sent her sprawling across the floor. She bit down a cry of rage as her chest hit the ground. Ethan extended his hand to her, his voice calm. "Ah, you hurt?" he asked. His tone was not mocking, but that only made it worse for her pride. She ignored the hand and rose by herself, her breathing heavy, her jaw clenched. How could this be? She was supposed to show everyone the weakness of humans, yet here she was, humiliated before the entire hall. She tightened her fists, determined to strike harder. She leapt again, this time with a punch aimed straight at his midsection. But when her knuckles connected with his abs, it felt as though she had slammed into stone. The pain surged through her bones, and she cried out before she could stop herself. She fell back, cradling her wrist. Silence filled the hall. Her arm felt wrong, almost broken. The instructor's voice echoed, sharp and commanding, ordering the drill to pause. But all eyes were fixed on Ethan, who stood unshaken, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths, not a scratch on him. Lyra's heart raced. She could not understand. How could something that looked so fragile feel harder than alloy? She looked at his calm face and saw no trace of arrogance. He was not trying to humiliate her. He was simply standing there, solid as the ground beneath her. Shame burned in her chest. Her entire life she had been told that humans were weak, that their bones snapped like twigs and their bodies crumbled under force. Yet in one clash, her belief had shattered like her bones nearly did. She lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes, her pride bleeding more than her wrist. But in that same moment, a small spark lit inside her, a strange feeling she could not name. It was not hatred, not anger, but something closer to respect mixed with fear. As the instructor dismissed them, Lyra kept her distance, but her thoughts spun wildly. She replayed the moment of impact again and again in her mind, the pain, the shock, the look of calm strength on Ethan's face. She told herself she would test him again tomorrow, that she would prove her people right. Yet deep inside, she knew something had changed. The human was not fragile. The human was something else entirely. That night, as she sat in her quarters, staring at the bandages on her wrist, she could still feel the echo of his abs or bones. It was not weakness she had faced. It was strength hidden in a form that deceived. Her people had always looked at humans with contempt, but she now wondered if they had all been blind. She whispered to herself in the silence of her room, "What are you really?" And for the first time in her warrior life, the alien girl felt a shiver of doubt. The next morning the training hall was alive with energy as squads gathered once again. Weapons clashed in drills, boots struck the floor, and voices rose in shouts of determination. Lyra stood quietly at the edge, her bandaged wrist a reminder of the humiliating defeat she had suffered the day before. The other cadets did not speak openly, but their whispers reached her sharp ears. They had seen what happened when she tried to strike the human. They had seen how she was the one who limped away while he remained standing like an unshaken wall. The shame burned in her chest, but it was mixed with something else she had never felt before, something she could not name. When Ethan walked into the hall, her heart jumped in her chest. He looked the same as always, calm and collected, his expression unreadable, but there was something in the way he moved that unsettled her. It was not the movements of someone weak. There was confidence, not arrogance, in his step, the quiet ease of a man who did not need to prove anything. Lyra clenched her fists. She had to prove that yesterday was nothing but a mistake. If she let this continue, the other cadets would believe that a human was stronger than her, and she could not accept that. When the instructor called for combat drills, Lyra stepped forward and demanded a rematch. Ethan tilted his head slightly, studying her with calm eyes, and then gave a small nod. He did not speak, and his silence felt heavier than any words. The cadets formed a circle around them as the two faced each other again. The instructor gave a signal, and Lyra launched forward with all the speed and power of her warrior blood. She struck high, low, and fast, each blow designed to overwhelm. But Ethan deflected her with simple movements, each one controlled and efficient. As if he had already seen her attacks before she made them, her frustration grew. She kicked at his legs, but he blocked smoothly. She tried to strike at his ribs, but his arm intercepted with ease. No matter how hard she pressed, he did not stumble or falter. It was as if she was throwing herself against a mountain that refused to move. The cadets murmured, and her pride burned hotter with every second. She would not be humiliated again. With a cry of rage, she gathered her full strength and drove her fist into his torso, aiming directly for his stomach. Her knuckles struck his abs with a sickening crack. For a moment she felt the impact ripple through her bones, and then pain exploded up her arm. She staggered back with a cry, clutching her wrist. The bone had fractured. She could feel it. The crowd gasped. Ethan stood completely still, his chest rising with calm breaths, his eyes fixed on her with quiet concern rather than triumph. Lyra's face burned as tears stung her eyes, not from the pain alone but from the humiliation of being broken against the very human she had called fragile. She wanted to scream that it was impossible, that it could not be real, But her wrist throbbed and her bones told her the truth. Her pride refused to accept. She had misjudged him, and in doing so, she had broken herself. The instructor rushed forward, demanding that she be taken to the medics, but Ethan stepped closer and gently held her arm steady. His touch was careful, steady, and warm, nothing like the arrogance she had expected. His voice was calm as he spoke. "Hold still. You'll make it worse if you move." The cadets around them whispered louder now. Their eyes were no longer mocking her. They were filled with shock and something else, respect for the human who had stood unmoved against a warrior and broken no sweat. Lyra wanted to shout at them, to silence their stares, but her voice caught in her throat. She had no defense. Her body had spoken for her, and it had declared Ethan's strength more loudly than words ever could. At the medic station, Lyra sat silently as her arm was treated. She stared at Ethan's back as he stood nearby, his hands clasped behind him, waiting without complaint. She could not understand him. Most warriors she knew would have gloated, would have smiled at her pain, would have enjoyed watching her pride collapse. But he said nothing, and that silence weighed heavier than victory. When the medics were finished, Ethan simply nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. That night Lyra could not sleep. She lay in her quarters staring at the ceiling, her arm bound in a cast, her mind replaying every moment of the match. She remembered the shock when her fist struck his abs, the sound of her bone fracturing, the calm look in his eyes. She remembered his steady voice telling her to hold still. She hated how it made her feel, hated the heat in her chest when she thought of his calmness, his strength, his silence. But beneath the hate was something else, fear. She had believed humans were fragile. Yet here was a human who had broken her bones without lifting a hand, simply by standing unshaken against her best strike. She whispered to herself in the dark, her voice trembling. How can this be? What are they hiding? What is he hiding? Her pride still demanded an answer, but her heart trembled with the truth. Humans were not fragile. Humans were something else, something dangerous, something her people had never truly understood. And now, for the first time, she felt a new kind of fear, not of losing in battle, but of discovering just how strong these fragile-looking creatures could truly be. And deep inside her heart, though she refused to admit it even to herself, she felt a spark of respect. The base was quiet that evening, almost too quiet. The drills had ended, and the cadets rested in their quarters. The large halls that usually echoed with shouts and footsteps were calm. Lyra sat by her bunk, staring at the cast on her arm. The throbbing pain had dulled, but her pride still burned hotter than fire. She had tried to strike Ethan again and again, and in the end, it was her own bones that gave way. She could not escape the memory of that sound, the way her fist cracked against his abs like stone, the calm expression on his face as though the clash had been nothing. She told herself she hated him for it, but deep inside, a strange respect was growing. One she did not know how to accept. The silence of the night shattered with a deep boom that shook the walls of the base. Red lights flared and alarms screamed through the corridors. Cadets jumped from their bunks, scrambling for weapons, and the voice of the commander roared through the speakers, warning of an attack. Lyra's heart pounded as she grabbed her blade with her good arm and rushed into the hallway. The air vibrated with panic and footsteps as soldiers poured into formation. Then came the sound of explosions outside, and the metallic roar of ships descending. Enemy raiders had launched a surprise attack, and they were already breaching the perimeter. The walls trembled as blasts shook the structure. Lyra gritted her teeth. With her arm still healing, she was not at full strength, but she would not hide. Her people did not run from battle. As she ran toward the outer gates, she saw Ethan moving swiftly with a group of cadets. His face was steady, his eyes sharp, And in that moment she noticed again the way he moved, calm, focused, unshaken, even while others panicked. The gates crashed open, and the raiders stormed inside. They were tall, armored beasts with weapons that glowed red, snarling with hunger for blood. The cadets raised their defenses, but fear hung in the air. Lyra braced herself, gripping her blade tight, her broken wrist screaming with every heartbeat. She was about to charge when she saw something that froze her in place. Ethan, the human she had mocked as fragile, was running straight into the fight. The raiders swung their heavy weapons at him, but he dodged with speed that shocked even her. He moved with a rhythm that was not wild but precise, each motion flowing into the next. His fists struck like hammers, his kicks drove enemies to the ground, and his body seemed to endure blows that would have shattered others. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she saw him grab a raider by the throat and slam him against the wall, the enemy's armor cracking under the impact. He was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder, but he did not stop, his eyes burning with determination. Lyra charged into the fight, unable to stand back any longer. She fought beside him, slashing with her blade, but she found herself glancing at him again and again. Every time an enemy struck at her, Ethan was there, intercepting, blocking, protecting without hesitation. At one moment, a raider swung a massive axe toward her. She was a second too slow, her injured wrist failing her grip. She thought the blade would split her chest, but Ethan stepped in front of her, taking the blow across his torso. The impact knocked him back and blood sprayed from the wound, but he remained on his feet. With a roar, he shoved the enemy away and countered with a crushing strike that sent the raider sprawling. Lyra froze, her heart pounding wildly. He had taken the hit for her, and he kept fighting as though pain meant nothing. She stared at him in disbelief. Humans were supposed to be fragile. They were supposed to break, to fall, to die easily. But Ethan fought like no one she had ever seen before. His body was flesh and bone, yet he moved like steel wrapped in fire. He did not fight for pride. He did not fight for glory. He fought to protect, and that strength was greater than anything she had ever known. The battle raged for what felt like hours. Explosions shook the ground, smoke filled the air, and screams echoed through the halls. Yet through it all, Ethan stood like an unyielding wall. Every time Lyra faltered, he was there. Every time she stumbled, he lifted her back up. The more she fought beside him, the more her belief shattered. The human was not weak. The human was unstoppable. When the final raider fell and silence spread across the smoking base, Lyra collapsed to her knees, her blade slipping from her fingers. Sweat dripped down her face, and her chest heaved with heavy breaths. She looked at Ethan, who stood bleeding and bruised, but still strong, still unbroken. His eyes scanned the battlefield, not for glory, not for recognition, but to make sure his comrades were safe. Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but no words came as medics rushed forward. Ethan finally sat down, wiping the blood from his face. Lyra moved closer, her casted wrist throbbing, her body trembling. She whispered, barely able to believe her own words. Why would you risk yourself for me?" Her voice cracked, filled with confusion and something deeper. Ethan looked at her quietly, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes steady. His voice was calm, almost gentle as he answered. "Because we fight for each other. That's what makes us strong." Lyra felt the words strike her heart harder than any blade. She looked at him, this human who had stood unbroken, who had taken wounds for her, who had fought like fire itself. For the first time in her life, she realized that true strength was not about bone or muscle or armor. True strength was something deeper, something humans carried within them. That night, when the fires of battle died down and the base returned to silence, Lyra could not sleep. She sat in the shadows, staring at her hands, feeling the ache in her bones and the weight of his words. She whispered to herself again, but this time it was not in anger or pride. Humans. What are you really? And deep in her heart, she knew the answer was far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The aftermath of the battle left the base scarred and quiet. Smoke rose from the broken walls, and the smell of scorched metal lingered in the air. Cadets walked with cautious steps, checking for injuries, while the medics hurried between the wounded. Lyra sat in a corner, her casted wrist heavy in her lap, her chest tight with emotions she could not name. She watched Ethan move through the hall, helping injured soldiers with calm efficiency. Each motion was controlled, precise, almost effortless. Yet she knew it had cost him. Cuts streaked across his face, bruises colored his arms, and his uniform was torn in multiple places. And yet he stood straight, steady, never showing fear, never showing weakness. Lyra could not understand him. For her people, strength was shown through dominance, through the power of the body, through victory over others. Weakness was shame, and pride was everything. Yet here was a human who had faced impossible odds, who had taken blows she would have crumbled under, who had protected others without thought for himself, and who did not boast of his triumphs. There was no arrogance in him, no need to claim glory. He had fought because he had to fight, and he had fought to protect. That was strength beyond anything she had ever known. She rose slowly, her casted arm aching with every movement, and approached him. Ethan was kneeling beside a fallen cadet, tending to a deep cut on his leg. His hands moved gently, carefully cleaning the wound, wrapping it in a bandage with skill and patience. Lyra's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "Ethan, why did you risk yourself for me?" Her words were quiet, almost a whisper, but they carried the weight of everything she had felt since the battle. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes calm, and for a moment, she saw a softness that contrasted with the fierce strength he had shown on the battlefield. "Because we fight for each other," he said simply, his voice steady. "Not for pride, not for glory. We fight to protect the people beside us. That is what makes us strong." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had been raised to believe that strength was measured by bone, muscle, and skill, but his words struck deeper than any blade. She realized that true power was not just in the body, it was in the will, in the courage to face danger, in the choice to stand for others even when it costs everything. Her mind replayed every moment of the battle, every time he had protected her, every blow he had taken without faltering. She had faced him in training, thinking she could break him, and she had been wrong. Humans were not fragile. Humans were terrifyingly strong, because their strength came from their heart, from their will, and from their unshakable determination to protect those they cared for. For the first time, Lyra felt her own shame, not just for being defeated, but for having underestimated him. She had mocked humans, believed them weak, and thought her superiority was unquestionable. Now she saw that she had been blind. Her pride felt heavy in her chest, but it was not the same shame as before. This was different. It was the realization that she had been wrong, and the awe that came with seeing strength that transcended her understanding. She moved closer, her eyes fixed on him, searching for something in his face that could explain this power. I thought humans were fragile," she admitted, her voice low. "I thought you would break under even a small strike. I was wrong. I see it now. You are stronger than anything I imagined." Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Strength is not only in the body," he said softly. "It is in choice. It is in courage. You fight because you must. We fight because we choose to protect. That is the difference." Lyra listened, letting the words sink in, feeling their weight settle into her chest. She remembered the clash of yesterday, the pain in her wrist, the way her bones had shattered against his abys. She remembered the battle today, the way he had shielded her, the way he had stood unbroken against the raiders. Every moment replayed in her mind, and she felt a strange warmth spread through her being. Respect, fear, admiration, they all swirled together, forming a feeling she had never known. She wanted to deny it, to push it away, but she could not. She sat down beside him, careful not to disturb his movements, and watched as he continued to aid the other cadets. The room was quiet except for the sounds of soft voices and the shuffle of footsteps. She felt her pride soften, replaced by a determination to learn from him rather than fight against him. She wanted to understand this strange, unstoppable strength that humans carried, a strength that came not from dominance, but from choice, from heart, from courage. Hours passed, and the base slowly returned to order. The injured were treated, the broken walls repaired, and the cadets gathered to debrief with their commanders. Lyra stayed close to Ethan, observing, learning silently, her mind racing with thoughts she could not fully express. She realized that her people had judged humans too quickly, had dismissed their potential without understanding the source of their power. Humans were fragile only in appearance. Inside, they were fire, unbreakable and relentless, capable of enduring pain and facing impossible odds with courage that rivaled any warrior species. When the debrief ended, Lyra finally spoke again, her voice steadier this time. "Ethan, I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about you. I thought I could break you, but I could not. And now I understand. Strength is more than bones and muscle. Strength is choice. Strength is heart." And then looked at her, his expression calm but kind, and nodded. "That is right. True strength is what you choose to do, not what you are made of. You fought well today. You have courage, even with your wrist injured. That matters more than any muscle." Lyra felt a surge of emotion, something she could not name, but it made her chest tight and her eyes burn. For the first time in her life, she felt humility, respect, and admiration all at once. She understood that humans were not the fragile creatures her people had believed. They were something greater, something terrifyingly strong, and she had been fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. As night fell over the base, Lyra sat silently beside Ethan, watching the stars through the tall windows. The battles of the day seemed distant now, yet the lessons remained vivid. She knew that her life, her beliefs, and her understanding of strength had changed forever. She had underestimated humans, but now she would never make that mistake again. She had seen their heart, their courage, their unbreakable will, and she knew that strength came in many forms, not just the forms her people revered. In the quiet of that night, Lyra whispered to herself, "I thought humans were fragile. I was wrong, and now I will never forget their strength." She looked at Ethan, sitting calmly beside her, and for the first time, she felt a sense of peace and trust. She knew that together, whatever trials lay ahead, they could face them. Humans were not fragile. Humans were unstoppable, and deep inside her, Lyra felt a promise form, a promise to respect, to learn, and to fight beside them as an equal. No longer blinded by pride or prejudice, the sun rose over the rebuilt base, painting the walls with golden light. But the calm of the morning was only a prelude to the storm that would come. Intelligence reports warned of a massive attack by a powerful enemy commander, a raider who had conquered planets and crushed entire squads of warriors. The cadets gathered quickly, weapons ready, their faces set with determination. Lyra stood beside Ethan, her broken wrist fully healed, but still reminding her of her past mistakes. She had learned the truth about humans and their strength, and she was no longer filled with prideful arrogance. Now she was filled with respect, determination, and a quiet confidence that came from knowing who she fought beside. The alarm blared, echoing through the base as enemy ships descended from the sky. The ground shook with heavy impacts, and the air smelled of fire and burning metal. The enemy commander led a squad of raiders far stronger and faster than any Lyra had faced before. She glanced at Ethan, who adjusted his stance with calm precision, scanning the approaching enemy. Every motion he made was measured, steady, unshakable. Lyra realized she was no longer the one to protect him. He would protect everyone, and now it was her turn to stand by his side, not as an observer, but as a true partner. The commander's forces crashed into the base with terrifying speed. Lyra and Ethan moved together, their steps in sync as though they shared the same mind. They fought side by side, covering each other, anticipating each other's moves. Lyra slashed through attackers while Ethan blocked and struck, his fists and kicks precise, devastating, unstoppable. She marveled at his strength and endurance, but this time there was no shock or doubt. She knew his power came not from size, not from bone or muscle alone, but from heart, courage, and unyielding will. At one point, the enemy commander swung a massive energy blade at Lyra. She raised her weapon, but the force behind the blow was enough to push her back, and for the first time, she felt fear grip her chest. Before she could react, Ethan leapt in front of her, his chest taking the strike. Sparks and heat splashed against him, and blood streaked his uniform. But he did not fall. His eyes remained calm, focused on the commander as though he had calculated every movement in advance. Lyra's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from awe and a growing bond she could not deny. She joined him immediately, moving with him as they pressed forward together. Every enemy they faced fell before them, not because of brute force alone, but because of coordination, trust, and the invisible strength that humans carried within. Lyra realized that the stories her people had told were wrong. Humans were not fragile. They were more dangerous than any warrior she had ever known, because their strength was not predictable, not easily measured, and it was rooted in loyalty and willpower. The battle reached its peak when the enemy commander himself stepped forward, towering and armored, his eyes glowing with malice. Lyra faced him, her weapon ready, and Ethan moved beside her, his stance calm, unwavering. The commander laughed, confident that these two could not stand against him. He struck at Lyra with blinding speed, forcing her to dodge, but she was pushed back against the wall. She felt the fear rise again, but this time she did not falter. She glanced at Ethan, who nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and she understood. She was not alone. Together, they attacked. Lyra moved with precision, striking at the commander's weak points, while Ethan blocked, dodged, and countered. Their movements were synchronized, a dance of strength and willpower. The commander struck Ethan with all his might, but Ethan absorbed the blows, countered, and delivered a strike that staggered the enemy. Lyra pressed forward, combining her attacks with his, and finally, with a coordinated effort, they brought the commander down. The enemy forces, seeing their leader fall, scattered in retreat. The base fell silent. Smoke rose into the sky, and the soldiers looked around, panting, battered, but alive. Lyra dropped to her knees, exhausted, her wrist throbbing with pain. She looked at Ethan, who stood nearby, bloodied but unbroken, and a strange mix of emotions overwhelmed her. Pride, awe, respect, and gratitude all swirled together. For the first time, she saw clearly what humans were truly capable of. They were not fragile, not weak, not to be underestimated. They were unstoppable because they fought, not just with their bodies, but with their hearts, with their choices, and with their will to protect others. Lyra rose slowly and approached him, her voice trembling, filled with emotion. "I thought you were fragile. I thought humans could not fight like this, but I see now. You are the strongest being I have ever known." Ethan looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips despite the blood and exhaustion on his face. "We are strongest when we fight for each other," he said softly. Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deep inside her. She had learned that strength was more than bone, more than muscle. Strength was courage, loyalty, and heart. The cadets gathered around, looking at the pair with new respect. They had seen the battle, seen how Ethan had stood unbroken, seen how Lyra had fought beside him and learned from him. A new understanding formed among the soldiers. They realized that humans were not to be underestimated, that their strength was not obvious but undeniable when revealed in moments of courage and unity. As night fell, the base stood rebuilt and stronger than before. Lyra and Ethan stood together, watching the stars through the tall windows. The air was quiet except for the gentle hum of repairs and the soft footsteps of cadets returning to their quarters. Lyra felt a calm she had never known before, a sense of peace and respect for the human beside her. She knew that whatever challenges awaited in the galaxy, they could face them together. She had learned that humans were not fragile. Humans were unstoppable. In that quiet moment, she whispered to herself, "I will never forget. I will never underestimate humans again. Their strength is greater than anything I imagined, and it is an honor to fight beside them." Ethan looked at her, reading the unspoken promise in her eyes. No words were needed. They had fought together, survived together, and learned from each other. Their bond was forged in fire and steel, trust and courage, and it would endure whatever battles lay ahead. The story of the alien girl and the human soldier ended not with defeat or humiliation, but with understanding, respect, and triumph. Lyra had once believed humans were fragile, but she now knew the truth. Humanity's greatest strength lay not in appearances, not in size or muscle, but in heart, courage, and unyielding will. She had seen it, fought alongside it, and survived because of it. Humans were unstoppable, and she would never forget that lesson for the rest of her life. And as the stars shone above the rebuilt base, Lyra and Ethan stood together, ready for whatever came next, their hearts united, their strength unmatched, and their bond unbreakable. The end.